YouTubers, welcome to Real Turkey channel. This is Atilla Yeşilada presenting for Real Turkey channel. Today we're going to talk about Turkey's massive earthquakes and the damage. Here's my cover. The video is officially titled Quake, Erdogan pushed Turkish economy to the brink of the disaster. First of all, I want to provide you with my estimates of the true damage from the earthquake. Obviously, there's the human toll, and then there's the physical or financial damage. Then I'm going to make the argument that even though the earthquake could not have been anticipated, and obviously it's an act of God, in the face of which all governments are powerless, but Erdogan's past, current, and future mistakes have compounded the damage from the earthquake. So much so that Turkey is once again facing a crisis. And the last part of the video is me explaining what kind of crises are we talking about. I mean, obviously, there is a humanitarian crisis, but Turkey is also facing unsustainable external deficits and runaway inflation. And now Erdogan is going to make sure these damages get worse and Turkey will potentially face a currency crisis. Let's start with the damage. Currently, the official death toll is 42,000, but no one believes that number because eyewitness accounts, relatives tell us thousands have been buried under the rubble. And you know what? The wreckage is being cleared with body parts being shoved or poured into trucks that carry them away to dumpsters. That's really extremely sad. We shall only know the true human toll once the Turkish statistics agency Turkstat takes an official census and all the missing have been accounted for. The damage estimates vary. If you follow Turkey, I'm sure you have seen estimates ranging from 25 to $100 billion. I first define what we mean by damage and then explain why I think that the high end of the estimates are more realistic. Well, there are, three types of damages. A, output loss, simply because people are there unemployed, they're not going to report to work, and Turkey is going to lose part of its GDP. I think that's not massive. It's probably roughly $20 billion. Then there is the destruction of physical capacity, our physical wealth, farmland, buildings, factories, etc., etc. The estimate for those is $60 billion. And let me show you, I like to talk with evidence, and I want to show you a responsible, okay, what is wrong with, oh, here we go. I want to show you a respected account of the damage that agrees with me. This is from Financial Times. Turkey counts massive cost of rebuilding shuttered towns and cities. Here, an expert agrees with me that the rebuilding costs may be up to $100 billion. Now, in my view, they're not going to be more than $60 billion. But there's another thing that received very little coverage in the world press, which is that all Turks keep part of their financial wealth at home under the mattresses, as it is called, in the form of physical gold, bars or coins, hard currency, dollars or euros mostly, and of course a lot of jewelry. Now, with more than 300,000 buildings either completely collapsed or so heavily damaged that no one dares enter them, it sounds to reason that a lot of the wealth went with that because people jumped out with their pajamas, with their babies in their hands to rescue their lives. They were in no shape to go back into the buildings and claim their financial wealth. So that's another $20 billion. These are rough estimates, but as I've showed you, Financial Times agrees with me. $100 billion, to put it in perspective, is roughly 11% of Turkish GDP estimated for end of 2023. As I've said, the earthquake was unprecedented. I think it's one of the largest natural disasters of the 21st century on this planet. The planet is Earth, by the way, the third rock from the sun for my wide audience from Tau Ceti and other stellar systems. But the cost was compounded by Erdogan's mistakes. And here I want to show you another source. This is from another respected news outlet, The Guardian, and it's by, I really like this, there are many like that, which I'm going to link below this video. Constance Lech, an act of God caused the earthquake in Turkey. Murderous corruption caused so many deaths. Let me just remain silent for a couple of seconds so you can take a glance at this article. How is Erdogan responsible for this damage? Because he orchestrated several land amnesties. Land amnesty is a peculiar Turkish construct that's very difficult to explain to anyone from the Western world, and probably anyone from Earth. This is what happens. Before each election or periodically, the Erdogan government passes legislation saying buildings that have been declared health hazard by health authorities, that have been built in violation of zoning or building codes, or that are not earthquake proof, are now legal. You can get legal deeds for these, and you can buy and sell them as well as occupy them. This is what's called a land amnesty. Obviously, Erdogan is not the inventor of land amnesties. I think the first one dates back to 1980s to the legendary President Özal, and there was one in 1990s. But under Erdogan, these have become periodic, which created moral hazard, meaning that every construction company expected a new land amnesty to be passed, so they simply built and kept the buildings empty until legislation made them legal to occupy and sell. The latest land amnesty, passed in 2018, was the biggest Erdogan brag that he has, solved the problem of 500,000 people or so. And of course, people pay a fee to the state in return for receiving official deeds for these properties. This raised $2.4 billion for Mr. Erdogan's election campaign. In fact, there was another motion in the Turkish Grand Assembly to declare another land amnesty so Mr. Erdogan can replenish his coffers for the upcoming electoral campaign. But that's not it. Mr. Erdogan committed other cardinal sins. Before I get into that, I want to show you another excellent article. That's one of the very few that has been published on this issue. This article is originally from Forbes. 3 things that went wrong in Turkey's earthquake response. I have linked it here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the original. We take excerpts in our English language website, PA Turkey, for important articles like that. And I don't want to be in violation of any copyrights, or I don't want to really be unfair to any publication. This is not from PA Turkey. It's from Forbes, and it's a rare gem, because it explains how the one-man political system and mistakes immediately after the earthquake has compounded damage. What did Erdogan do wrong? The earthquakes transpired around 4 a.m. and reportedly 5 minutes after the earthquakes, both the chiefs of staff of the Turkish military, let me just center this, I suppose, and the Interior Ministry rang up Erdogan to tell him that they are ready. They are in fact on the field, on the scene of the disaster, and starting intervention, rescue aids, aid delivery, etc. Reportedly, Mr. Erdogan told them to wait because he wasn't sure the earthquake was really that big of a deal. And he didn't want the army, the only institution capable and willing to effectively control the situation in these disasters, not only in Turkey, but in the United States as well. To grab the lion's share of the rescue efforts, essentially Mr. Erdogan kept the army in its barracks for 2 days, and there was really no institution to fill that void, as a result of which thousands of people died under the wreckage. There was massive looting and plundering, and really the civilian agencies were incapable of organizing food, medical services, and shelter. And that's his next mistake. Turkey, in addition to the army, had a Red Crescent, the equivalent of Red Cross for Christian countries, which had been instrumental in dealing with this type of disasters. You got to remember, Turkey is one active fault line. I mean, we're sitting on an earthquake zone. So, Red Crescent was in the past extremely prepared. It was denied the opportunity to immediately go to the field because all of its emergency response authorities were transferred to an AKP-controlled emergency response agency called AFAD. And guess who is running AFAD? The board of directors are members of Binali Yıldırım's family, the prime minister and the closest lieutenant to Mr. Erdogan. And it's staffed not by an aid expert or earthquake expert or any kind of expert, but by a man whose only credential for the job is having been graduated from a religious school, what you would call a parochial school or Catholic school, I suppose. I suppose Protestants don't have schools like that. That's the second mistake. AFAD was simply not capable of dealing with the scope of the emergency, as a result of which hundreds of thousands of people simply migrated away from the zone. They are very unlikely to return. And hundreds of thousands more were left freezing in the cold to their own devices to find food, even to find toilets. And since the entire rescue and response effort was delayed, corpses began stinking, rats multiplied, and now the health ministry is beginning to admit that there is outbreaks of disease, probably cholera and, as well as some viral diseases such as smallpox. These are initial reports. I don't want to unnecessarily blame any agency, but from the sound of what Health Minister Koca said, yeah, we might have an outbreak of devastating contagious disease in those areas. I think last but not least, Erdogan also discriminated in the provision of aid. Aid was prioritized to municipalities and towns governed by AKP aldermen and mayors, and those with pro-opposition majorities were not abandoned to their fate, but put down at the bottom of the list. As importantly, there are numerous accounts, visual accounts of authorities, the police, the AFAD officials, stopping the Alawite faith organizations from helping out the victims in terms of establishing soup kitchens. Thousands of 16-wheelers full of aid materials sent by CHP mayors from Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, as well as from across the nation, being stopped and forced to turn over their content to AFAD simply because they were coming from opposition municipalities. The Kurdish rights movement, HDP, the Pro-Kurdish Rights Party, and other Kurdish NGOs have mounted a very effective rescue effort, but their NGOs were taken over by AKP appointed administrators. So even now, despite claims to the contrary, there is not enough tents in the area. In tent cities, there are no toilets. There is very little medical aid, and even Mr. Erdogan had to admit that up to 1.6 million people may have to be evacuated from the earthquake zone out of a population of 15 million. This is disaster. Now move on to the economic costs of it. Even before this calamity, Turkey had an external deficit and a high inflation problem. External deficits, we economists call them current account deficits. These ended the year 2022 at roughly $50 billion or roughly 6% of GDP, which is an alarm bell. This is not a rule, but a rule of thumb that in Turkey, any current account deficit higher than 4% of GDP is difficult to finance, given our very low credit rating and the fact that there is really no financial investors left in the country. As of January 2023, official inflation, CPI inflation, was 60%. You may be wondering what I mean by official inflation. Turkstat reportedly have been instructed to keep the inflation count low because obviously high inflation is a tremendous negative for Erdogan going into the elections, which will be held by mid-May or mid-June. The data we collect from other agencies such as labor unions, NGOs dealing with poverty, as well as private sector research outfits suggest that the true inflation may be running not at 60 or 80%. Now, these problems are going to get worse. You can see my previous video simply because the factories in the area cannot produce, which means a lesser aggregate supply, but demand will continue because there will be some kind of financial aid or welfare payments, unemployment payments to the earthquake victims. So you have more demand chasing less supply, and that's going to cause the inflation problem to get worse. I humbly estimate that unless a strong anti-inflationary program is instituted, which is not possible under the Erdogan regime, CPI might ratchet up to 80% sometime in the autumn months. Now, current account will have increased anyhow because you have fewer exports from the area, which constituted roughly 9% of the exports, and some of it will have to be imported, but that's not a big deal. Here comes Erdogan's next mistake. He immediately wants to initiate a rapid rebuilding program. He promised to build 60,000 houses or buildings within a year and 200,000 buildings as soon as possible. No one estimated the cost to the state of building these buildings, but they are very likely to trigger an economic crisis for the simple reason that Turkish economy was already running hot before the earthquake, which means there was very little spare capacity. Now you're gonna move all of your resources in terms of iron and steel, construction steel, cement, building machinery and equipment to this zone to build new houses, which is obviously going to require more resources. And these resources have to be imported to a large extent, or the construction materials industry, which exported something like $16-17 billion worth of goods in 2022, will stop these exports and funnel all of its output to this rebuilding effort. As importantly, it doesn't make sense to start building immediately on the earthquake zone. You need city planning. You need consultations with local people, with earthquake experts, and with city planners to make sure that the new units, in fact, the new districts or cities that will be built on safe ground, and there will be proper zoning for green areas, for hospitals, for other civic services. None of this is going to be done simply because Mr. Erdogan knows the earthquake was the final straw that will cause him to lose elections, and now he wants to increase his reputation and his support among the voters by engineering this huge rebuilding wave. Obviously, he's not going to invite IMF to bankroll the financing of these rebuilding efforts. He's not going to be able to raise a lot of taxes because, well, voters don't like taxes. So these are going to be financed by what we call money printing. In a sense, the Treasury will sell bonds with low yields to the central bank, and central bank will print money and give it to the Treasury to spend on the rebuilding effort. Now, obviously, if you print a lot of money, it's not only inflationary, but it also raises demand for FX. And this is actually what's happening. Let me show you the article from Reuters on Tuesday. Reuters reported from Turkey that Turkey dug deep into reserves to keep lira stable through Quake. This is based on information from bankers. The article says year-to-date, central bank sold roughly $7 billion from its meager FX reserves to keep the Turkish lira stable. Now you have to remember that once you clean out the central bank balance sheet from all the frivolous items that have no practical implications, its usable reserves to defend the Turkish currency are roughly $30 billion. With 4 months left to elections, if you are spending $7 billion of that in 1.5 months, the math simply doesn't work out. And moreover, Turkish depositors that have so far patiently remained in Turkish lira, hoping that the inflation shock was transitory or Mr. Erdogan will relent on his policy and allow interest rates to be raised, are now realizing that they're losing massive purchasing power by keeping their savings in Turkish lira. So they're switching out of Turkish lira into FX deposits, or even they're taking their money out of the banking system to store under the mattresses. This is creating this tremendous pressure on the currency. If you watch my videos, I have been claiming since last autumn that Turkey is going to face a currency crisis, which made me the laughing stock of my dear audience. I love being trolled, so I don't really care. So far, it hadn't transpired simply because, in addition to selling very large amounts of FX reserves to control the exchange rate, central bank also imposed an informal or quasi-currency control, capital controls regime, meaning that corporates and banks were no longer free to transact as they wish in hard currency. Essentially, an increasing portion of the foreign currency wealth in the system, as well as inflows through exports or bank foreign borrowing, have been confiscated or controlled by the central bank, so it has more leeway to control the exchange rate and to sell reserves into the FX market. Now it appears that the game is over. Turkey is going to face another currency crisis similar to what transpired on 21st of December 2021, which led to an annual depreciation of the currency of 40% or 50%. Now, of course, Erdogan is not going to let something like that happen. Instead, Turkey will impose official currency controls or capital controls, which means I, Atilla Eşilara, if I want to, one will not be able to transfer my money out of the country or even take it out of the bank. This is a natural disaster, but its cost to the economy and to the people of Turkey are largely caused by Mr. Erdogan. I want to thank you for watching these videos. I hope you appreciate them, and if you do, either subscribe or click the like button. Hopefully I'll see you in another video soon, which would herald better news. Bye bye now.